Hello, welcome to another video. This is part 4 in the multi-part series on replacing rocker panels in a Mercury Sable station wagon. The first 2 videos we spent removing rusty metal. The third video we took and built the backing part of the rocker panel part of it in, and in this one we're going to start building the inner rocker panel with a combination of fabricating new pieces and welding to our old pieces, and we're going to start putting more of it back together. A lot of cutting, welding, so stay tuned if this interests you.
Okay, before we really get started here on this round, this is where we left off in the last video. If you missed it, we have the complete backing of the rocker panel all fastened in, and we're now going to take and build upon this, but wanted to give a general overview, and we still have more backing rocker panel to do at the back of the car, but that'll come once we do some more. And first here, we're going to take the wire wheel on the grinder and clean up some of the flux from the flux cord welding wire. Yes, the wire wheel on the grinders and a quick, efficient way to clean this flux up if you have the room to work, but I do recommend wearing leather gloves while you're doing it, because you can feel at times those little wires will break off and they'll come back and sort of sting you like it be, and they're just completing the process up towards the front of the car. You want to particularly watch when you're using the wire wheel and a grinder like that nut for the seat belt. It'll want to catch against it and kick around on you. But just a little word of caution, a little information if you've never done it before. And furthermore, besides the leather gloves, I'm also wearing a full face shield while I'm doing this for keep out of your eyes. Now, after we've done this, we're going to take just using 100 grit sandpaper, 80 to 100, and just going over the bare metal here just to sort of rough it up a little bit. The objective here, eventually, we're going to be putting a coating, a primer on it before we start closing this off that you won't be able to access it. Now, you can get a little a little look at the face shield I'm wearing. As with many of my tools, the face shield, this sander I'm using, a whole lot of it has come from Harbor Freight. Now, on the other hand, the grinder I was using, that actually came a while back from Tractor Supply at the Porter Cable, but I do have a bunch of Harbor Freight tools, and if you have an air compressor and are in the market for a dual action sander, this is a great little dual action sander, this little palm handheld from Harbor Freight. Okay, here we're getting just around the back end of it, and we're going to be moving on here to next step here of coating this. Yeah, it is once I get around this seatbelt nut. The grinder wheel is too big and clumsy to really get it, and then I'm just cleaning some rust out around it. Again, soon it'll be hidden away and it won't be accessible anyhow. Well, I shouldn't say soon. There's a lot of fabricating in that, but it will get to that point eventually. And I have mentioned this in the previous videos. If you are doing this and it's your only car to drive, plan on about per side, about 2 weeks that you're not going to have access to the car while you're working on it if you are as rusty as this car. Just sort of a little, again, word of advice. That's about how long it took me on each side. Now, I'll admit I didn't work maybe as much as I could have on it, but I put probably a good 6 hours a day on it, 7. Okay, it looks pretty good. Here's a look at the welds from the previous video that we had done. If you missed it, I'll be sure to put a link in the description. Yeah, the big thing with this put in, have again something now to start building the inner rocker panel. What we're looking at, I'll call the backing part of the rocker panel, and we're going to be building in this video part of the inner rocker panel. We're not going to get it all, and there is where had earlier had welded the rocker panel in, and you can see the weld penetration through the inside of the car. Pretty decent. A little bit of It was a little hot at places, a little burned through, but not bad. Again, sheet metal is a little tricky to weld. That's sort of what your back sides of your weld should look like. Here, get the wires out of the way. I'll show you here some more. You can see where the weld penetrated through. Then it just ends because it's on the back side of that brace where the seat bolts to. And there's up towards the front. Now this hole. I'm going to make this hole again. Now on the other side, I think this is a waste of time. The other side, I just did it. I covered the hole. I don't really see as it does anything. It had just a piece of tape on it, but you can even see where I peeled it off. It's primer. They must have put the tape on. But for sake of, I guess we'll keep the car original. In this video, we're going to refabricate this hole opening again for whatever it does or really doesn't do. And to start another thing, if you do want to keep this hole, probably the simple thing, and I never even gave it a thought, was before welding the panel. And I should have taken and doing what I'm doing right now and marked it on the back side and pulled it away and ground it up. But since I didn't, you see I worked with the 10 snips to sort of get a little gouge in it. Now we're going to take and trim this more with the 10 snips from the outside. It's pretty hard to get to from inside the car, and there we got rid of a piece of this metal, maybe. Yep. Okay, now due to my mistake, I'm inside the car pounding some metal outwards. There you can see it pounded into place. And I'm going to come back around and grab it with these long needle nose pliers, and then we're going to take, now we can hopefully pry it down. That's the objective, pry it down some and then trim some more with the 10 snips, or maybe I'll just try this grinder here with the cutting wheel on it, and we're going to cut this nice and flush with the rocker panel backing. Alrighty, that looks better now. Now I can just simply use this little grinding angle grinder and just clean the hole up, and that is how I reopened the hole again. But for again future reference, one, do what I did on the other side. I think it's a good answer. Just put the metal up further and close it off. Or if you do want to keep the hole and the metal overlaps the hole some, just simply take and mark it and pull it off the car and do what I did with the angle grinder before, then it would be easier. Now we're just taking and cleaning this dust and that away before we put some primer on it, just using the Rust-Oleum wax and grease remover, then rag soaked with the stuff, and then just dry it with a simple dry rag and just repeat over the whole area. As far as this step, again, the objective is to hopefully, with a good clean surface before putting the primer on, it'll stick better and it'll last longer and not rust. That's the objective. Again, eventually, if you use these cars and sold, it'll rust again, but this car is 20 years old, so if it lasts 20 more years, I don't think it'll even need to last that long. Now we're just putting our light layer of primer on it. This is filler primer, bought at, guess where? Yes, you never guessed, Harbor Freight. But it seems to work well. Was for a long time $3.99 a can. It's $4.99 a can now, at least at my local Harbor Freight, but it's still not a bad buy. And it's not actually weld-through primer, but I've used it before. It seems to work. Long story short, where you weld will burn through anyhow. Okay, now here is the front part of our inner rocker panel. I'm not going to totally make a new piece, but we're going to make part of the new piece. This rusted away on this. We're straightening out where this had been spot welded to the front door opening on the Sable Wagon. Yes, actually in the earlier videos when we removed this, I was sort of surprised to even find this intensive per se inner rocker panel on this car, but I guess it is one of the reasons Tauruses are considered such safe cars. I know I put rocker panels in old Explorers before and pickups, and they didn't have it because of the full frame, I suppose. Okay, now what we're doing is measuring the distance between the backing part of the rocker panel and the corner of this inner rocker panel. And we're going to be taking here and cutting this rusty edge off of this inner rocker panel with the grinder with the cutting tool. Alrighty, and there is our rusty bottom edge of it removed, and then we're just going to take and measure the length of it, since we measured the width of it to the back of the panel, and it's going to be around 25, maybe like 25 1/4 inch long. And zoom in there if you can see it, and we're, like I say, going to cut another piece of metal for this eventually here, and then we're going to measure the thickness of this. Okay, that is 1 inch. Then after you flip it around, that's another inch. Now, I don't honestly think the original is going to do what I'm going to do, but I like what we're going to do here. Okay, now we're measuring the 25 inches long, but we're going to make this a little wider because we're going to totally be able to, like you'll see here, bend it and weld it to the backing part of the rocker panel. Now here I'm using the speed square to mark where I measured, and I think made it about 25 1/4. I think I said 25, and now we're going to take and make it 5 inches wide the whole way down through. Now I'm going to take and put a little mark every couple inches. Be sure it's all nice and the same width the whole way down, or at least close. I mean, it's not like you're doing engine work or something that has to be within 100,000ths of an inch, but you don't want to end up with it real crooked either. Now I'm just using a conventional square, and I'm going to sort of connect the little marks I made with the marker earlier the whole way across, and then we can take and cut this out using the angle grinder with the cutting wheel. Alrighty, there we cut the length. Now we're just going to cut the width of it. Do the easy part last, and then we'll have our metal freed up. And again, the measurements I'm given in your scenario, highly unlikely they're going to be exactly the same. There could be variations. You'll need smaller patches or larger ones, but it's a guideline what to look for and where to measure. Okay, now we're marking a 1 inch each side, or actually 15/16. The edge of the speed square, the fat edge there, is 15/16, which is close enough to an inch, and we're going to put this in the bending brake, and we're going to be putting a 90-degree bend in it here. Just line it up with our marks, with the lay it down on the, like I say, metal bending brake. And this metal bending brake, speaking of Harbor Freight, yes, it come from Harbor Freight, but before there was any stores, I bought it around 2005, and it was strictly, at that time, at least in our area, they were strictly mail order catalog business, and I ordered it out of their catalog. Yeah, I'm clamping this thick, it's probably about almost a 1/2 inch thick piece of metal down to hold this in place while we take our handles here and just merely pull up here to bend the panel. I used to have this mounted on a workbench, but I ended up with a smaller workbench and I don't use it that often, so I found the sawhorses do work clamped to the sawhorses. Yeah, you gotta sometimes stand on the sawhorses like you would see there to keep it working, but at least when I'm not using the bending brake, which isn't that often, I can keep it out of the way. And there's our first needed 90-degree bend in the metal. Now we're just going to take, this is actually 2 3/4 inches, which is exactly, I don't even need to measure the width of the bending brake, and we're going to clamp our thick 1/2 inch piece of metal, or approximately, back in place, and we're going to put a 90-degree bend in it, but in the opposite direction here shortly. Yeah, I will look on your website. I really can't say I've seen one of these bending brakes in the Harbor Freight since they have the stores, but if they do have them, I'll put a link. I want to say it was $100 or a little bit less. I know they have bending brakes at Harbor Freight. I was just there today, but I know the one they have is large. I'm going to say like 4 foot wide, and it's like $250, but I don't know if they have. They probably do. I just haven't been looking. No need to get it. And there is our metal bend. Okay, now back over to the car. I think you can see where we're going with this. I'm going to take here and clamp it to the backing part of the rocker panel temporarily. And we're going to get everything fitted up in place. And you see how I'm doing this. It's actually like going to be closed the whole way in. Now I think actually the factory just had it like bent out, I mean in towards the backing part of the rocker panel like an inch. But again, they use like about a 1/16 inch steel. This is 20 gauge steel instead, but I think this will compensate for the difference in thickness. And then we're just taking the welder and going to take, and like I say, just fasten it temporarily. So it is definitely where we need it to be. And after a few more just little stitch welds, we're going to be taking it over to the bench vise and welding the seams. But this again does ensure it's definitely where we need it. There's another, like I say, little tack weld we're putting in. Okay, I think I want to put one more yet in place, and it'll be good enough. Like I say, one at each end and one sort of in the middle, and that definitely, it'll stay where you need it to be. Okay, and that concludes that for working on the car, and there's sort of where we're at right now with everything clamped in. But again, it's only temporarily clamped in. It's coming back off, but that's the progress made up to this point. Oh, when it comes to welding, you can't really seem to have enough vice grips and C-clamps and all sorts of stuff to clamp stuff. You'll use them. I think I have 6 pair of vice grips, and I think that's about all of them that was in place they're holding at the moment. Okay, and there we are. Next step here, we're going over to the top of the bending brake. We're just going to take and tap the metal in where we have welded nice and tight in with the old and new. So like I say, it'll weld nice. And here we're going to clean a little bit more up so it's good, and it'll weld nice with the grinder, get it all nice and shined up. Alrighty, now we get to start doing some serious welding. I want to weld the back side of it here first, and just again, it's like always working with sheet metal. Just start with some little stitch welds instead of one big long seam, because the metal will warp and burn through. And there's 2 little spots down there. We got another one, and just keep repeating every so often there. A couple of inches spread. Start with probably about every 3 inches, and then you can start working it in closer. And in between, the metal will start pulling away. Just take and tap it in place. And here's another spot we're doing. I have mentioned it in earlier videos, and you had actually seen it earlier there in the background if you were watching. I use a Hobart MIG 140 welder. I've had it a couple years now, and it does a real fine job for everything I've been needing it for. It has a nice slow enough heat setting to weld this 20 gauge sheet metal. And on that, I'm using the lowest heat setting on the welder. It's marked 1 through 5 on the MIG 140, and I'm using the setting number 1, which is ample. Yes, if you're getting into a project of a car this rusty, you're going to need a way to weld. And I recommend doing a little homework before you just go buy a MIG welder. Don't buy the cheapest one. I made that mistake before I owned this. But again, there's other choices besides this MIG 140, but they still make them, and I can vouch they are a good welder. But there's Lincoln Electrics, and possibly I see Harbor Freight now has a fair amount of welders, and actually some that are more money than this Hobart. So, but again, do some research, read your reviews on it, and make a decision. And if you buy a better quality welder, you will have, if you've never welded before, will have a lot easier time to learn. That is sort of a sad thing on the real cheap MIG welders that are made for people on a budget and just starting. They're actually quite a bit more difficult to use than a better quality welder. And now you notice that we got some of the stitch welds in. We're welding longer sections at a time. We're starting to connect our little stitches and make a complete seam. And then in between, clean the flux off. And on that, that's sort of, I use 30 thousandths flux cord wire. Since I had that first MIG welder. I haven't messed around with the solid wire and the gas. I have all the stuff came with this Hobart, but I'm content with the flux core wire, and you don't have to worry about running out of gas while you're welding. And the only really plus on the solid wire, it does not maybe make as much mess, but again, that's body work. You have to grind it anyhow if it's somewhere you're going to see it, and still finish it off with some body work. Or in like this case where you don't see it, well, it doesn't have to really end up looking that nice. Alrighty, and there we got another section of it welded, and we're going to take here and give you another point of view of it looking down on it. Yeah, everything's going pretty good. I actually got about 2 inches, maybe 2.5 inches welded on that. And we're going to start doing another spot. Yeah, this is going pretty. Once you get going, it's like I say, it don't pull away in that as much, and you can make a lot better progress on the seams. Oh, and one welding tip, once you have your first initial stitch welds, when you go back through, starting on an existing weld is a great way to prevent burning holes in the metal, because it's a good, again, substantial surface to start your arc upon. And also while you're welding, you can sort of watch what I'm doing. You sort of want your gun like on a little bit of an angle, and you just have to pick the talon up, but you'll see you get the molten puddle. And once you get the little molten puddle, you just sort of want to keep working it back and forth, and you can pull your weld along. And again, you can hear and just see once you're getting the right technique on it. And if at any point you can't start an arc welding, and you're looking right at it now, don't forget to check your grounding clamp. I've been there and done that over the years, even after doing it a while, and you move stuff around, reposition it, and then you wonder why you can't get an arc, and it's simply because you forgot the grounding clamp, and then you feel sort of dumb afterwards. Okay, it's time here now. I want to run the wire brush and get some of the flux. That flux will also build up. I'm not saying you have to do this between every time welding. They actually tell you should, but every so often it don't hurt to clean some up to help begin to make a good arc. And if you notice right there, I didn't go the whole way to the end on it, because that's sort of something you'll end up burning a hole in it. I went pretty close to the end. Later on, we're going to start where we left off and finish that off. But now we're back in the sort of the inner part of it here, doing another seam. Yeah, I hope watching this helps you out in your project, or help you make the decision if you want to tackle it yourself or not. I'm not, like I say, really giving you pretty much a full overview. And also, if you take notice while I'm welding, you don't have to, probably holding the gun about a 3/4 of an inch from the metal, maybe an inch. You don't have to hold it real tight there. That also helps prevent burning holes in it. As mentioned earlier, sheet metal is tricky to weld. But if you do find you're continuously having problems of burning holes in the metal, there's a few problems. One, the gun heat setting's too high on the welder, which that's back down to your cheapest welders. That was my problem with my first welder. It didn't actually have a low enough heat setting to handle the sheet metal. Or you're taking there and you're holding the gun too close. That's another thing to check. you're holding the gun at the wrong angle. That's another possibility. Or simply, now if you get into the last one here I'm going to mention, what you're trying to weld is too rusty. Besides burning holes, if you end up trying to weld into places too rusty, it'll like really snap, crackle, and pop. It doesn't make that nice sizzling sound. Alrighty, there we got another large amount done. We're actually about done here. Take the wire brush here over it again and get it cleaned up. And again, every so often I've been doing that. Now we're going to take here and prepare to weld it from the other side. This maybe is overkill, but I think it will make it stronger. Again, back to the unibody curve. And then again, it just will help keep moisture and that out of it between the layers for a longer period of time. I mean, in a case like this where you're welding on a bench and you can easily access both sides, if you only want to weld one or the other, go ahead. That is strictly up to you. But I think, again, it's not really that big of a deal. But nevertheless, it'll make a lot better job in the end. But that's just my opinion. You can handle it as you wish. And there we go. And now we're ready to weld again. You will find there, if you do decide to weld both sides, the opposite side goes a lot easier since you already have the back done and it has it nice and pulled together, the old metal and the new metal. And there we're getting our stitch weld started. But again, it's going quite a bit simpler. And that is worthy of mentioning. I have in the other videos, and I'm going to keep up the routine, but doing this, besides the actual rocker panels, if you do buy the rocker panels, as I purchased for this car, is a big help. But like what we're doing here, these do not exist, and you're going to have to get some sheet metal sheets of it there to be able to cut pieces out of and make patches. And I have a place locally that's real good to deal with. I buy a 2-foot by 4-foot piece of 20 gauge sheet metal for $31.99, but it's something you'll have to do some research in your area, because as far as like the big box home improvement stores, I don't even think sell sheets that large. I think they only have like 1 foot or maybe 2 foot squares, but they want probably what I paid for this just for those smaller pieces, if not more. I wouldn't surprise me any. But if you don't have access, it's actually a place called Surplus City, and they sell metal, a lot of auto body supplies, and a bunch of miscellaneous tools and that. But if you don't have a place like that, look in your area. I'm sure there's some welding shops or something. Perhaps they could help you out on it. Yeah, that is talked here. We're going to take and move here another part of it and do some more welding. And here, which we've done earlier, you're going to take the wire brush and clean some of the flux off. And an alternative to using this wire brush, because later on I actually had taken I moved on to the other side of the car. My wire brushes were all wore out. Didn't feel like running the store. I just put a wire wheel in the cordless drill and did the same thing, which is actually probably easier than using the wire brush. Just another idea for anyone watching. In addition, if you have any questions or anything, which again, it'll be a link in the description, you can, like I say, contact me through my website. Use the contact form, the comments below. Either one will be just fine. If you're in a larger hurry, probably use the contact form on my website, because it'll go to my email, which I check daily. The comments on YouTube, I usually only check them 1 or 2 times a week. Okay, and here we're getting there out towards the end of it, another place welded. And where those oval shaped holes are, there's not enough metal, since the back side's welded. I'm not even going to try to weld across that. Yeah, I'm trying to, throughout the video, give you different angles on watching me weld. I mean, I can explain to you sort of what to do, and show you, but it's still, you're going to actually have to do it there if you've never done it before. But like I say, watching this perhaps will help you out. And I will recommend one other thing: if you've never welded at all before, practice some on thicker metal, around 1/8 inch thick steel, perhaps even 3/16, a little thinner there to get the hang of it. It's a lot easier before you start with sheet metal. Although I was stubborn, I started with sheet metal, and I know I wasted a bunch of wire and had a bunch of scrap pieces of sheet metal picking it up. So I guess either way does work, but it would have been easier if I would have started with, again, thicker metal till I picked the hang of it up. And even once doing it, well, if you notice there, I have some unburnt wire that scraped away with the brush. I have messed up, and like I say, didn't get good arc, and it didn't melt. And again, we just had a piece of wire, and here's another time here. We're going to take and finish this out to the edge here carefully. When you get out to any edge of metal, you want to try not to burn holes in it because it's easier. And there, look, we have like a U-shaped piece of metal from a little bit of a boo-boo. Yeah, I know the first I tried welding on a vehicle was probably in about 2006. It was Ford Aerosol rocker panels, and I started on it, and I wasn't having good luck, I know that time, but I picked it up then over the years. I got fed up and ended up going back to what I had used for a long time, good old pop rivets, but eventually we picked it back up on vehicles, and we got to the point, well, now I don't even think of pop rivets. And one thing I like with welding, never using pop rivets, it really pulls the metal in tighter. And like when you're welding on a car, which I have showed in earlier videos, and you'll see coming up here while you're welding, well, it's nice and warm, you can tap the metal in even tighter before you weld another spot. It makes a lot better fit. Alrighty, one little spot here to finish on this, and we are temporarily done welding. And there is the completed weld job on the outside of it. There, zoom in close, let you get a good look at it, and just take here. We'll walk out across here, nice and slow. Camera focuses, it's being stubborn, but they do that at times, and there's what you're sort of looking for. And again, the welds aren't the prettiest, but it don't have to be. You're not going to see them. And with sheet metal, as I've said over and over, since you have to stop and start, you're never going to get that continuous seam. And there's the back side of it. Now we're going to clean this up with the wire wheel and the angle grinder, and gets prepped up here before we weld it into the car. Yeah, the wire wheel and the angle grinder does, if you have room for it, makes a pretty quick job of cleaning that flux and that up and shining things up if you have the room to access it with it. Yeah, say you get done before you know it using one in the angle grinder. Alrighty, now we're going to grab our 6-inch dual action sander and just sand real lightly where it's easy to access. Just sort of rough it up, because a lot of times when you use that wire brush and the grinder, it really shines the metal up, and primer and such don't stick as good. And we're just going to, like I say, it's just sort of roughs the surface that hopefully all I'm going to be doing is primering it here shortly, that the primer does stay on good. And while it's still off the car, we're going to grind good around these spot weld holes that's at the upper part there, or the inner rocker panel with the door opening. And it's easier than doing it on the car since it's still off. Yes, if you notice, you do a lot of grinding when you do welding work. And if you notice, I actually have two grinders. They're not especially this here was from Harbor Freight. This was like 1999, and the other was my porter cable, was about twice that, but it don't hurt to have two. Now, this is a punch flange tool. It's sort of a metal paper punch. We're going to punch holes in this bottom edge so we can do plug welds to the back side of the rocker panel. Weld this inner part to the back side. If you don't have one of these, you can always take and drill a 3/16 inch hole. But like I say, this does make very short work of the job. As you see, no time flat, you're done with it. And there it is. Alrighty, here we're over back on the sawhorse, and we're going to just wipe it down with the wax and grease remover again, as we'd done earlier in it. Again, it's maybe sort of monotonous showing it again, but just a little reminder. And it does help keep primer and that on, and hopefully rust away longer. And again, just on with the rag soaked in it and the driving to dry back off, real easy to work with. And besides working with metal work, that wax and grease remover does do what it's supposed to do. It is excellent on clean up on your daily driver, road tar and such. And now again, just our primer, the Harbor Freight Special, the high build primer, and just coat everything on the inside. Not worried about the outside. That can be accessed after the welding's done. Okay, after our break away from the car working on the workbench, now it's time to put this back on the car again. And here we're back to our reliable vice grips. Going to get one here at the back corner to start with. Whatever works for you. Like I say, 30, you have to hold with one hand, grab your vice grips with another. Unless you have another second set of hands when you're doing this, might help out there. At least it's not heavy. It's just sort of want to try to get it in position. And for right now, I'm just going to let it go with the two on the top here. And there's sort of, and those spot welds lined up with where I drilled them. Just puts it back pretty much, you know, it's where it was originally. Okay, and here to start getting it to hold in place itself, I'm using another pair of vice grips, and instead of worrying about welding upper spot welds, I'm just going to get a little bit here at this corner where it meets the car, the inner rocker panel, and that'll be a good start of it there as you start getting wet clamps down the road here. Okay, but nevertheless, speaking of this upper spot welds, now we're going to take and pound one in nice and tight with the back part of it using the punch. And now we're going to start in the middle. And on these, since they're larger, the factory ones, because they're drilling with the spot weld cutter, sort of try to work from the, like around the outer edge in towards the center instead of from the center out. It's sort of a little bit different because they are so large after, again, using that spot weld cutter. But to clarify, I still said to start in the middle because, again, of the pilot hole you drilled, which only takes a little bit to close that and then do the deal work from the outside towards the end part. And then here we're going to butt weld it to the A-pillar, the inner rocker panel, and that worked out nice. And then again, tapping our metal in tight so the next go around it'll weld nice. And here we go. Oh, and for your information, the flame you see and what was burning, I didn't clean it away on the inside. That is seam sealer that caught on fire from the factory just a little bit there. And you get that take, and then I did scrape a bunch off. Afterwards, I didn't show it in the video. I just took and putty knife and scraped a bunch off, and this should prevent it from really happening. And there you get a better look at welding one of these original factory spot welds back shut that was cut using the spot weld cutter. And on the other hand, there still was some seam sealer there to catch on fire. Well, that's one thing. On this, I have the carpet and seats and all out. It's not really the end of the world because all I was going to do is burn that seam sealer. There's nothing else for it. As long as there's nothing else nearby to catch on fire, it'll just melt off, and that's just that. Now, that's why, on the other hand, you wouldn't want to take and try to do this with the carpet and such in the car. It would be a very large fire hazard. Not a good idea whatsoever. And here we're going to take and get down here on the bottom edge of this inner rocker panel and get our first place here to hold it into place. And there I actually did a plug weld, one of the ones we punched in with the flange tool, and you notice they're a lot easier to fill in than the ones that was, like I say, the redoing the originals, but was cut with the factory, the spot weld cutter. And now we're going to go here to the rear edge of it, and we're going to take here and do another spot weld. Oh, excuse me, I meant to say plug weld. Again, I don't actually have a spot welder. If you have one, more power to you, but they are, like I say, fairly costly tool. They're good to weld spot welds, but this sort of, again, limited operation what you can do. And here we are starting in the center of our 3/16 hole and welding our plug weld. Alrighty, now we sort of have it fastened on all corners. Now we're going to work here again. Since we're down, we're going to move our vice grips here and get one towards the middle of this inner rocker panel. You notice how before I crimped the vice grips, I took it over the hole punch for this plug weld and pushed in real tight on it there. So again, the metal's fitting tighter before the plug weld. And if you take notice, I actually welded a little bit down below the plug weld. That's sort of a little bit, it's definitely a for sure hold if you're skeptical about the plug welding itself. And I sort of became in the habit of doing that. I always just sort of do the plug weld and then down a little bit below. And that's why I left the extra on the backing part of the rocker panel, the extra metal, because then when it's all done, in a future video, we will be trimming that off. Okay, and here's another one we're getting accomplished, and voila. And we're going to go work back up on the top again. And we have enough fastened at the bottom. Now we'll just keep working back, never bending the metal back good and tight on the top before we're crimping the vice grips on. And I will say, if you really like your vice grips and you don't want them to get messed up, well, invest in other vice grips, because when you weld, they end up with all sorts of burn marks on them and metal slag. They take a pretty good beating, but mine, like I say, I'm not worried about. They've been through it before. Actually, the biggest thing I don't like, but none of mine except for one pair do, I really don't like with the welding, like the ones with the rubber grips. I do have one pair with rubber grips, but I sort of last resort to get those out. And there we go. I'm going to move our vice grips forward here and do some more work here at the top edge of it. And once I get them clamped there, then they don't want to come off. Haha, you gotta love it there. And there we go. Yeah, perhaps we're pushing in tighter there with it there. Okay, now we're going to do another one. Yeah, you have to excuse there. I don't know why for a little bit the camera, like I say, I had it on a tripod, and that when I was taping it didn't want it to get out of focus, but anyhow it seemed to come back. I guess because of the welding arcs, although earlier it wasn't doing it. Okay, and there we're back down on the lower end of things, and we're going another plug weld. Okay, yeah, over the years I've sort of come accustomed to the fact you might as well figure if you're going to have older cars and live in the Northeast or any of the Salt Belt areas, it's probably just as good to pick up the hobby of doing some of this body work, because it's going to happen. And in some respects, it is perhaps a lesser evil than having motors go bad or transmissions go out, which, knock on wood, I haven't had either for a good while. And now we're getting another one of the plug welds done, and okay, we're just going to move one more forward and do the next one here. However, what concerns me, and that I've never welded whatsoever in upcoming years, like the newer I know Ford trucks are aluminum body and such. Now that's a whole nother ball game. And aluminum, contrary to if you believe any difference, you're wrong. It does corrode, but it just sort of like turns to a powder. But that's something we'll cross that bridge when the time comes. Okay, and we're getting through this pretty good. Now we're going to go do some more up on top. If you again, definitely the 3/16 inch hole would take a lot less time than these up on top, but hey, again, it's sort of the other option on this on the top, and I don't think it'd be really worth the aggravation, is where those are. If you took and like tried to plate it across there with another piece of metal across where they were at, and then just do the 3/16 inch holes. But I don't really mind, again, welding the larger holes where the spot welder would cut, and that's sort of one reason in the earlier videos, and there'll be links to them. When I drill the spot welds, I never drill through the second layer unless it's an accident, so you have something to weld to when you go back in with it. Alrighty, and there's that one. That one was fighting between the seam sealer wanting to burn on the back edge and such, but okay, now we're going to start doing more butt welding on this seam where it meets the A-pillar. And when you're doing butt welding, it definitely, once you get a little bit put in, if you can restart the weld where you left off, it definitely helps out considerably to prevent the burning holes in the metal and making mistakes. But on that, we're going to let that go for a little bit and go back and do more of the plug welds here up at the top of the inner rocker panel before we do more on that and let it cool good. And if you listen, right now, my wire speed is feeding too fast, and it's not melting quick enough to do properly, which I figured out here shortly. I didn't pick up on it today right away, but earlier this day, I had a gentleman come over, and I did some work on his car, change oil and that, and I didn't even pay attention. He must have been messing with the settings on the welder. The wire speed got turned up to like halfway up, but if we do figure it out, it just takes, again, not as quick as I figured it out when I was editing the video. Yes, actually on this Hobart welder, I usually keep it never as low as the number 2 on the dial, but never usually quite to 3, like probably like between the 2 and the 3, or maybe like 2 3/4. You adjust a little bit as your wire gets smaller, or just a slight amount, but it's pretty much fairly consistent, and that goes with welding sheet metal or welding thicker metal, like 1/4 inch thick, 3/8 thick there, because you're running higher heat compensates for the wire speed. And this spot right here, they had a sense of humor. You have one of the factory spot welds and one literally like right beside it, and we're just going to grab it right now. Alrighty, and that takes care of those two right close together, and here we're going to do another one. That's another nice thing with the flux cord wire. It does work good in metal that's not exactly the most perfect there. This little bit of corrosion in that, it's actually made for imperfect conditions, such as working on rust repair on cars. And I don't know if I mentioned it in this video or not. If I did, excuse me. I know I did in the earlier video, but the wire I'm using just comes from the same place I buy the sheet metal. This round, it had been for a long time $12.99 for a 2-pound spool. It went up to $14.99, but it's still a better deal than like I had for ages. I thought I needed the Hobart wire. I was going to the Tractor Supply, and it wasn't bad for a while. It was around $19.99, but I believe it's like $24.99 now or $26.99, and this seems to, again, the biggest key on the flux cord wires, just don't get a damper or anything, and it seems to do a good job. Okay, and here we're just about done with the little plug welds here across the bottom. This, I think, nope, there's one more yet, but we're just about there. Or I better open my eyes. It looks like there's 2 more yet, but yeah, well, we're getting there one way or the other, whether if I can count or not. And as usual with all my videos, I will, like I say, have a nice lengthy description with timestamps in it down below so you can access certain parts of it. And here we're going to get the next to the last one, and we're getting our count right. And in addition, due to the length of this video already, once we finish welding this part of this front part of the inner rocker panel in, we'll conclude this video. And we're going to pick up from this one and the next one. Again, I try to cover everything, and it does take a good bit of space. I try not to cut too much out, so again, not to let anything out. And now we're going to move up front and finish welding, butt welding this seam. Alright, that covers a large portion of that. We'll let it cool a little bit. Now we'll go back and we'll finish here some more on it. Well, not really completely finished, but we're getting pretty close. We were saving the best part for last here. There you can hear I wasn't getting contact. Flux was fighting with me, but I wanted to get it done, and we sort of pulled ahead, and we got there, and I cleaned the flux off with the wire brush. And again, as I mentioned earlier, the drill with the wire wheel might be a better answer, because I ended up doing that anyhow. And just a little bit more here to finish up to the top. And excuse the camera again, I guess the bright flash there is being stubborn on it, and now it's back in focus. And we're going to go here down and work down here towards the bottom edge. Or more correctly, I should have said start low and weld upwards, but anyhow, you can see what we're doing. And we're going to soon be to the point here we're going to have to weld down underneath. That's what I was referring to, the saving the best for last, but that's always fun. Okay, and that concludes that edge of the butt weld seam. Then we're going to do it again. I'm not even going to say it, you know what we're doing. And now we're going to here soon go down, and we're going to work underneath. And here we go. Yeah, ready. There's a starter down under, and now we're going to work some more on it. And welding overhead is something that I'm not the greatest at. You do get better, but at all costs, if you can avoid it, you're better up. But once in a while, such as this, you do get into a situation where you have to. And it does work to some degree, but it again does take more skill to make it do what you want to do. And again, I'm not doing the 4 stars at it here, but we are getting it seam welded. Now, what would help, and I do later in the video, and I thought it was at the time, if you jack the car up a little bit higher, that you can get the MIG gun at a little better angle. And I thought I did have it jacked up, but I didn't. I realized that during the making of the video, but anyhow. And what else helps is perhaps the style of your MIG gun, because this MIG gun, while I was working on this, not yet, I was still the original one that came with the Hobart welder, broke, but my replacement MIG gun is a lot more flexible, which in this deal with welding overhead is quite handy. Okay, and there is a look at the finished product there from the back side across the door opening, and there you can see where the welds came through. And that was where we were welding, and the seam sealer was burning off. And there's down underneath those smaller plug welds we did, which are pretty good. A little bit of burn through there, but nothing major. And there's a close-up of our front seam that was butt welded. And here we're just going to take and give one last look at everything. And as mentioned, this is going to conclude number 4 on these videos, and like I say, you can stay tuned there and be looking for part 5. And there we go, one last look, and this is again where we'll be picking up a number 5 video. Thank you again for watching.